The mysterious voice says that he knows the name of this uncontrollable youth very well. He says that the boy who was locked within 4 walls has reached the level of a sword master. The mysterious voice is sure that the young man was slowly going mad while he was in his chambers. He called the boy Count Boring's useless eldest son, Creed Boring. The man couldn't believe that he, the strongest knight in the north, had managed to lose to some freak. Creed said he spent a lot of money making this hot night trap. Large-scale fires raged in the area, covering vast areas. Creed slowly approached his defeated opponent, who could not believe what was happening. The young man asked if the strongest knight of the north liked this comfort and warmth, and if it was really so. The man can't believe that that lousy boring boy found out about his plans. Creed said that he knew not only about the plans of the strongest knight of the north. The young man said that he knew about the number of troops gathered in the northern lands. The guy said that he also knew who was spying and transmitting information to the man. Creed is sure that he even knows who sent reinforcements to the strongest knight of the north. The Boring's eldest son said he knew about it all along. The man said that this couldn't be because he always had an ace up his sleeve. The strongest knight in the north shouted out how such a talentless piece of shit could have managed all this. The young man didn't want to listen to the loser's screams any longer, so he decided to calm him down. Creed ordered the man to close his mouth immediately. The guy is confident that the northern army will attack again and again, and he will be the only winner. Creed asked the man if he knew why their futile attempts would not produce results. The Boring's eldest son said that all this was because he knew all their plans and intentions in advance. About 10 years ago, in the kingdom of Ludania, not far from the Boring's mansion, Creed shouted something unintelligible, not having time to fully figure out what exactly had happened to him. The young man asked himself how this could have happened, why he remained alive. The guy didn't understand what was happening now. He was watching his own death with his own eyes. Young Boring lost his last battle with unprecedented defeat. Creed understood that there had never been an opponent before who could even begin to compare with him. The young man couldn't find another word that would convey all his feelings, and he squeezed this out of himself, bitch. The winner of the duel shouted that this was how he appeared, the end of the king of mercenaries. The knight announced that Creed Boring, one of the 7 strongest swordsmen, had fallen by his hand. Boozy, the noble swordsman and one of the 7 great swordsmen, offered the enemy the final word. Creed muttered hoarsely that he was left with only regret for the unfulfilled revenge. King of mercenaries, Boring shouted out that he wanted to see this creeping bastard die. Boozy said that the young man in front of him was so arrogant that he felt sick just looking at him. The winner said that this eldest son of a fallen clan left his family after the death of his sister. Creed asked how a stranger from another kingdom could know such a forgotten story. Boozy said he was running around trying to track down the mercenary king's past. The winner said that it was they who worked with the Delphine family to overthrow the Borings. Creed suddenly realized that it was not only the Duke of the Delphin family who was behind the death of his family. The young man realized that there were many people behind this incident who had not yet been punished. Boozy said that all his crucifixions were meaningless, because he was talking to a man who was about to die. Creed Boring found the strength to shout that he would never forgive the noble swordsman. The winner said he couldn't believe it because he was in danger of being doomed to die. Boozy swung his sword without a shred of pity or doubt, and now the Boring line was cut off. Creed thought he had been decapitated, but he was still alive, and his head was still in place. The rejuvenated guy noticed this, and thought that everything he saw was a hallucination, and nothing more. Creed thought that he had been handed over to the magicians for experiments, and that this was part of their cunningly planned experiment. A cry was heard from behind, directed at the young master of the Boring family. Rico looked into the tent and told the master to come out, because he knew that the young man was already awake. Creed threatened him with a blade and told the knight to be quiet and not try to call for help. Young Boring said that he would let Rico live if he obediently answered his questions. The guy said he could change his mind if he really didn't like something in the answers. The knight who entered frantically called out to the young gentleman, because he could not believe what was happening. Rico said he found such threats to be excessive, and asked that they not be made again. Creed thought the knight was out of his mind since he wasn't reacting to the threat, and asked what he was talking about. The man who entered abruptly pushed the young man away and shouted that he, with his hysteria, had worn everyone out. Rico said that the gentleman was hysterical because he wanted to lead a squad to clean up dangerous orcs. Creed Boring was surprised by what the knight said, and asked again which orcs exactly he was talking about. The young man did not agree that he could have thrown a tantrum, and Rico asked the gentleman to come to his senses. Creed asked his subordinate where exactly he was going to take young Boring. Rico replied that they were, of course, heading towards the Boring mansion right now. Creed couldn't believe his subordinate's words. To him, they sounded like something incredibly offensive. The young man shouted for Rico to repeat what he had just said because he had heard poorly. Creed asked if they were talking about the same boring mansion that the dolphins destroyed. The young man realized that his family estate was still standing in its place and was safe and sound. Young Boring couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't understand how something like this could happen. Creed thought that he personally witnessed the destruction and decline that reigned in these lands. Rico whispered that the young master was tormented by nightmares, since he called the family mansion destroyed. Young Boring thought that he was still in a dream. He could not give any other explanation. The guy was convinced that he was no longer sleeping, because the pain felt like it was real. Creed thought seriously about what he saw today. He compared his rejuvenated face with the intact castle of the Boring family estate. The young man thought that it turned out that he had somehow managed to return back to the past. Creed remembered that in his youth, everything about this place had irritated him incredibly, but now he felt differently. The boy admitted that he was creating problems because of feelings of inferiority caused by immaturity. Gradually, all the inhabitants of the mansion turned away from him, and then he could not stand the criticism and ran away. Creed knows that a couple of years after that, he managed to become a mercenary and survived many battles. The guy remembers when he decided to atone for all the mistakes of the past, he returned to the mansion, but found it in ruins. The Boring family's ancestral mansion, his family's estate, was razed to the ground, leaving not a single stone standing. The young man thought that he had lost everything then, but now he still had not escaped from the family estate. Creed realized that the people he cared about so much were also in their places. The young gentleman thought that he could barely restrain himself from breaking into a dance from the overwhelming joy. Young Boring realized that it was too early for him to rejoice, because Knight Rico spoke about the clearing of the orcs. Creed thought that he would definitely not forget that day, because most of the squad members died. The guy remembered that in his past life, he had tagged along with a cleanup squad to gain fame. That day, intelligence reported that there were only 3 orcs, and young Boring decided that he could handle command of the squad. Creed remembers that he saw at least 20 orcs on the spot, but he continued to command and killed the people. The young man understands that this is a completely feasible task, because the orcs do not understand tactics. Young Boring thought the only problem was that the troops wouldn't listen to his orders. Creed realized that something was different from last time, because he didn't remember such an incident. The guards shouted that the orcs were already breaking through the walls of their camp. The guards, unprepared for battle, shouted that the orcs had already entered the camp. Young Boring realized that the orcs had not attacked so suddenly last time. Something had definitely changed. The orcs that flew into the camp crushed the people, knocking their bodies aside left and right. The monsters advanced at a rapid pace, crushing more and more frightened soldiers. Some of the orcs were armed with massive weapons, which made them slower. The clearing commander shouted for everyone to take their position and meet the battle with dignity. Scoven shouted that the knights must not give in to panic and fear. Everyone was obliged to go on the defensive. The commander miscalculated the strength of the enemy, who easily broke through his block. The man realized that they had let their guard down, and were now thrown off balance by the sudden attack. Scoven heard the familiar voice of the young Mr. Boring call out to him. The young man shouted that the orc was attacking the squad leader, but he understood that he did not have time to react. The guy decided not to hesitate and personally cover the commander of the purge, so as not to deprive the army of confidence. Scoven didn't even understand what was happening now, because he didn't even have time to look around properly. Creed decided to meet the orc's attack and show him who the real warrior was. The commander understood what was about to happen. He saw how the young gentleman was about to die in his place. Scoven managed to shout for the young master to run and not to fight this monster. The commander of the cleanup squad didn't know that the young man was no longer the irritable and loud-mouthed brat. Young Boring skillfully twisted the blade of his sword and cut the arm of his attacker in half. The entire cleansing squad was able to observe these magnificent movements of the young gentleman. The orc lost his fight and lost his limbs, and so could only scream furiously at the one who defeated him. Young Boring became convinced that the monster was no longer going to attack or show aggression. Creed said that mana was still unavailable to him, but he wished he would return a little earlier. The boy asked if he was the commander, and Scoven asked in response what the young gentleman wanted. The young man extended his hand to the fallen man, and told him to hand over the right to command the detachment to him. The man didn't understand what exactly this rascal had in mind, so he hesitated with his unambiguous answer. Creed repeated that he wanted to have the right to command a cleansing squad and punish the filthy orcs. The commander still could not answer the young man. This was a fairly expected request from him. The commander realized that the boy had always been a fool, but to ask such a thing when so many lives were at stake. The man said that he could not hand over command to the young master. He was not ready yet. Scoven said that they were not playing games here, and noted that he was not able to transfer such power. Creed thought that if he were in the commander's place, he would have done exactly the same. Another ferocious monster decided to attack the commander of the cleansing squad. The squad leader shouted at the boy to take cover. He didn't have enough experience to fight anyway. Young Boring said he had no other choice and swung his arm to strike. Skoven barely managed to avoid such an attack from the young man, which would have almost killed him. The squad commander shouted at what this unbearable boy was doing. The man heard the death roar of the dying orc that had just attacked them. Skoven wondered what could have just happened, why he no longer heard the monster approaching. The sword of the young master of Borings hit the vulnerable spot of the orc, who was already ready to attack. The monster continued to roar and choke on its own blood, but could no longer take a step. The commander couldn't believe his eyes. The boy had dealt with another orc. Skoven wondered how this rascal had managed to hit the monster's vulnerable spot. Creed asked the commander of the cleanup squad if he knew what was most important in a fight. The young man is sure that the Boring troops will not win if they continue to tremble with fear. The young gentleman said that in order to achieve a successful victory, the army needs incentive. The guy immediately jumped up to make his plans a reality. Creed decided to show that victory would be theirs, and to do this, he had to give it his all. Everyone watched how deftly the young gentleman jumped on one of the orcs and finished him off. The commander looked on in disbelief. The uncontrollable offspring of the Borings was fighting ahead of everyone else. Creed told the orcs not to slow down and to keep advancing, otherwise he would get very bored. The guy shouted that he would cut all the local monsters into pieces and not even break a sweat. Having noticed the strong boy, the monsters immediately realized who their real enemy was. However, they couldn't even imagine how big the difference was between them and the young master. Creed gradually dealt with the giant monsters that had recently crushed his troops. Watching what was happening, Skoven could only assume that this was all a bad dream, nothing else. The commander realized that even he would have a hard time pulling something like this off. But this skinny kid could handle it. Skoven realized that Creed was about to run out of steam, but he still gave in and continued to fight. The commander noticed that the young man was using a minimal amount of movement to dodge. He is confident that the young master is striking exclusively at the orc's weak points. Skoven thought that the one fighting in front of him was a sword master who was unable to use mana. The squad leader admitted that the young man could be a true genius, strong beyond his years. Creed shouted that he expected more from these monsters, who couldn't even touch him. The young master shouted that these orcs did not really live up to their reputation as a warlike species. The knights and guards noticed that all the monsters were chasing the master, who was trying to escape. The soldiers shouted out why Commander Skoven was simply standing and watching the matured youth. The commander wondered what the hell he was expecting by calling everyone to attack him. Skoven noted that the young man's attack and his ability to attract attention were quite good and confident. However, the commander noted that he ran away, and in that direction there was a cliff. The squad leader was able to quickly figure out the plan of young Master Creed Boring. Skoven ordered all the servants to raise their shields and form a wall formation. The commander said that they would follow the young master because they could not abandon him. Meanwhile, Creed ran as fast as he could, hoping to succeed in his plan. The young man thought that since Skoven was such an experienced commander, he would be able to guess what the boy was up to. Creed knew perfectly well that he didn't have enough stamina to cut down all the monsters in front of him. The young man admitted that his life could end like this, but at least he was able to help deal with the orcs. A phalanx of warriors was rapidly advancing on the backs of an enraged crowd of distracted monsters. The orcs realized that they had been outsmarted, but it was practically impossible to rectify the situation. The knights closed ranks and rapidly advanced on the monsters trapped at the cliff. Creed admitted that Commander Skoven had managed to read his plan perfectly. The young man made a difficult decision so as not to create unnecessary obstacles for the allied knights. Already in flight, the young master told the knights to push harder and throw the orcs down. To ensure that no one dared to slow down the pace of the attack, Skoven shouted out the order, "Forward." The commander ordered the army to cast aside their fear and push all the monsters off the cliff. The knights did not even think of disobeying Skoven, and therefore they attacked the orcs with all their strength. The soldiers continued to press the enemy with all their might in order to achieve victory in this unequal battle. A small detachment of Borings successfully carried out their plan and threw off monsters that were stronger than them. The orcs screamed with all their might as they fell like loose stones. They were shattered into pieces under the cliff, with no chance at all of surviving such a fall. The Boring warriors, out of breath, rejoiced at their victory, exclaiming that they had gotten rid of the orcs. Meanwhile, Skoven and Rico looked down, and searching with their eyes, called out to the young Master Creed. The young man clutched the hilt of his sword and held on with all his might, just to see his comrades one last time. Creed saw how well his subordinates had done, and smiled as he looked at their frightened faces. Skoven noticed the young gentleman and quickly assessed the situation the boy found himself in. The squad leader smiled, showing that he had finally recognized the unbearable boy. The commander shouted at Creed to grab his hand because it was dangerous to hang like that. The young man replied that he had lost all his strength and could no longer even hold the handle. Creed saw how the expressions on his subordinates' faces changed, how happy they were when they noticed him. As soon as the squad noticed how the young man began to fall, they all shouted at once, "Young master!" The young man heard his younger sister, Elaine, call him by name. Creed asked what happened to her, why she suddenly decided to call him now. Young Boringov saw his younger sister asking him why his mother was no longer around. Then he saw a fragment of memory in which Elaine thanked her older brother. Creed noticed changes in his relationship with his sister. She asked what was wrong with him lately. Elaine said that her older brother is the worst person in this world. Young Boring watched all the fragments of memories and asked what was happening to him now. Creed said that these were his memories, from a past life, about his little sister Elaine. Suddenly the young man felt someone's touch. It was his sister, who was talking to him. Elaine asked her older brother not to leave her and to go with her. Creed opened his eyes abruptly and noticed that he woke up in his own chambers. The young man thought that he had survived, that Scoven's squad had managed to pull him out. The guy suggested that all of this could very well have been a simple nightmare. Creed realized that his whole body was aching with terrible pain. He realized that this was the result of the rapid jumps. Young Boring said that he was alive, which meant that things weren't so bad after all. A maid entered Creed's room. She noticed that the guy had woken up and turned to him. The girl was incredibly happy that the guy woke up right now. Creed asked if it was Valinda, and the maid said that she was incredibly worried about the master. The girl said that the young man could have easily stayed on the estate and shifted all the fuss onto the soldiers. Valinda asked why the young master had such a reaction, and whether she had done something wrong. Creed replied that he was simply incredibly glad to see his mentor. The young man understands that she was the only one who stayed with him until the very end, and endured all his antics. The guy understands that after the fall of the family they were unable to find her, so he never saw her again. Valinda asked where the gentleman got so much joy, since they see each other every day. Creed decided that he simply had to tell his mentor the whole truth about what had happened. The young man said that very soon a great misfortune would befall the Boring mansion. The girl asked what her master was saying, and he said that he had returned to life after death. Valinda played along and agreed with Creed's words, saying that the orcs had given him a good beating. The mentor said that misfortune would soon befall the young master, and not the Boring mansion. The maid asked what Creed would do if he got so hurt that he even had to miss the festival. The young Boringov asked what other festival it was, and the girl asked if he had forgotten. Valinda said that Lady Elaine was looking forward to the day when Creed would take her to the festival. The young man chuckled, and the mentor said that this was just a great chance to get closer again. Creed thought that there was one festival that was celebrated during this period of the year. The boy remembers that in his past life, due to negativity, he was unable to enjoy the festival with his sister. Young Boring asked how much time was left until the festival, and the maid replied that it was about a week. Creed thought for a moment and said, "That means the festival is next week. It's practically right around the corner." Elaine peered through the doorway and asked if her big brother was there. The young man wondered if the day that would change his whole life would really happen so soon. The young man's memories flashed again to his younger sister's request to go with her. Young Boring realized that his beloved little sister was about to die in a week. Creed couldn't resist and rushed to his sister to finally hug her for real. Valinda realized that the young master had indeed changed a lot. Elaine asked what had happened to her older brother, whether he had decided to play a prank on her again. The young man said that he missed his sister so much that he could not stay still. Elaine screamed at Creed to let her go because he was starting to scare her really bad. The boy thought that his sister had incredible strength, and asked himself if she had always been like this. Elaine said that Valinda asked her to come. The girl thinks that such jokes will not change anything. Creed's younger sister remembers well how he constantly drove her away, not even allowing her to come close. Elaine asked if her brother had lost his memory, and the boy was surprised that he could even say such a thing. The young man admitted that in his past life he was a complete piece of shit, and apologized to his sister. The girls were surprised that Creed apologized first, and the sister was scared. The orcs had beaten her brother severely. Young Boring shouted out that it was he who had hit the monsters over the heads quite hard. The young man asked why everyone was saying he was bruised, after which he felt a sharp pain. Elaine sarcastically agreed with her brother's words, and said that this was why he was brought in unconscious. Creed realized that the girls remained the same as the guy remembered them all this long time. The young man asked himself why he, in his past life, had worried so much about all sorts of nonsense. Young Boring remembers not going to the festival with his younger sister because of the disappointing results of the trip. Creed understands that that was the last time he saw his sister, and after she was found cut into pieces. The guy realizes that he should have been there for her to protect her. Someone knocked on the door of the young master's chambers and asked permission to enter. Bodyguards Jack and Phil looked into the room and were delighted to find Miss Elaine. The girl said she had asked them to stay outside, but the servants asked her to assess the preparations for the festival. Creed asked why they were asking his sister for such a thing, while ignoring him. Valinda said that my lord was too idle and that the estate was currently short of workers. The sister asked her brother to be careful, and the young man thought that he did not know that there was a shortage of workers. Young Boring said he was ready to provide any assistance he could in preparing for the festival. Elaine couldn't believe what she had just heard and even turned around to look at her brother. The girls are sure that the young gentleman is clearly not himself, since he volunteers to provide assistance. After some short time in the area where the festival was held, Creed shouted that he would help his sister, and Elaine told him to back off and not interfere with the others' work. The young man said that this is exactly how she treats those who sincerely want to help her. Young Boring realized that his younger sister's body would be far from the festival. She would be taken there by force. The guy must prevent this, and this means that he needs to find all the exits from the castle. One of the guards turned to the young gentleman. The matter was urgent. The young man recognized the face of the man who ran up to him. It was his personal servant, old Ferdinand. The elderly knight let out a sigh when he saw that young Master Creed was safe and sound. Ferdinand said that he immediately rushed to the master when he heard the disturbing news from the detachment. Elaine said her brother had recently woken up and was acting very strangely and needed bed rest. The young man is sure that his image as an idiot will hinder him for a very long time. Creed said he wanted to visit the long-abandoned training ground. The young gentleman is confident that he could do with some extra training. Ferdinand realized that Creed Boring had begun to think about more than just senseless pranks. The old man said that he would, of course, show the way to the abandoned training grounds of the Boring Castle. When the young man arrived at the place, he was surprised because he saw something completely different from what he thought. The guy said that this training ground was better than he imagined. Creed thought that in all his years as a mercenary, he had never seen such a training place. Ferdinand said they were keeping a close eye on the equipment in case the young man wanted to train. The old servant said that he was confident that the young master's difficulties would one day be resolved. Creed realized that in his past life, Ferdinand had been waiting for young Boring to grow up. The young man said that he wanted to live a long life and would try to postpone death as long as possible. Ferdinand apologized, the young gentleman's words reminding him of the recent incident with the cleanup squad. The boy said that his servant saw to the very root of the matter, because he had indeed died and been born again. Creed said the old man could wait for him outside because he was going to have a good workout. The young man understands that in his past life he treated others with hostility. The young gentleman is sure that he was simply too blind and stupid to realize the simple truth. Creed thought he had about a week to get stronger and protect his little sister. The boy remembers that in a past life, the Borings learned that a neighboring lord was behind Elaine's death. The young man is sure that it was after this that the war began, in which the Boring family suffered collapse. The young master realized that the death of his younger sister was the starting point of the downfall of his family. Creed decided that he had to save Elaine and save his family at any cost. The guy realized that at the very beginning, he should focus on his non-physical shell. The young man thought that he should have time to at least open the paths for the mana surrounding him. Creed knows that mana is a supernatural power that allows one to surpass one's limits. The young master understands that it is difficult to accumulate it, but he managed even in the chaos of battle. The guy thinks that he should at least feel the particles of mana that float in the surrounding air. Creed imagined himself concentrating the noticed threads and winding them into a spool. The young man knows that for a seasoned warrior, creating a mana core is a simple matter. However, the guy notes that this is not the only thing that allowed him to become one of the best swordsmen on the continent. The Boring youth remembers that he learned a special method of mana control in an ancient burnt library. Creed knows that this method doesn't just work with a person's natural mana core. The guy understands that he can already create all three linked mana cores. The young man notes that such a network of linked cores allows for the creation of destructive power. Creed realized that the 3 linked mana cores were his limit, at least for now. Young Boringov says that in his past life he managed to create 5 linked nuclei at once. The boy understands that this method allows one to master destructive power, but at a huge cost in mana. Creed realizes that in his past life, he lost to Boozy precisely because of this particular feature of the technique. The young man understands that this is not the most reliable technique, but for now, it should be enough. The young Boring heir thought that this time he would definitely cut off the head of the nasty Boozy. The guy decided that he would deal with the Dolphin family and all the henchmen of these scum. Creed promises himself that he will destroy everyone who in one way or another had a hand in the collapse of the Boring family. A whole week passed with this attitude, and the long-awaited day arrived, the day of the festival. Young Boringov prepared thoroughly for this significant date. Creed tried to take into account every possible scenario of an attack on his little sister. The guy couldn't screw up like he did in his past life. Now everything was completely different. Elaine was surprised that her older brother had come and asked what had been going on with him lately. The young man said that he was a representative of the Boring family, and therefore was obliged to attend such events. The sister said that her brother had come to his senses since he hadn't left the gym all week. Creed said he didn't see anything wrong with the Boring heir training hard. Elaine said her older brother used to say the exact opposite. The girl said that she was filled with joy from such changes in Creed. The younger sister said that she even felt like her old brother, whom she loved, had returned. Young Boring decided that he shouldn't say anything because now was not the time. The guy thought that over the past week he realized that the present and the future were already changing. Valinda asked Elaine's bodyguards to keep an eye on the gentleman so that there would be no problems with the visitors. Creed understands that major events will not change, but he will not be able to keep track of the small ones. The young man decided that he must definitely take advantage of his knowledge from the future. The guy knows that he must use the most effective actions in every possible situation. Elaine enjoyed herself at this holiday as much as she could, because it was not every year that her brother was with her. The young man did not like all the fun of his younger sister, but he could not leave her that day. Elaine said that she had a lot of fun today, but the festival will be over soon. The girl said that every year she sees the same thing, but she wants something new and interesting. Creed thought the festival was over, but nothing much happened. The young man realized that all this was because he was next to his sister, but he heard someone's familiar voice. The guard who approached said that one of his friends told him about a new and interesting entertainment nearby. Elaine didn't even have to be coaxed. She was hoping it would be incredibly fun. Young Boring realized who was to blame for the turning point in his past life. Creed realized that the Boring family had harbored two snakes who were about to reveal their true nature. The young man understands that everyone trusts Jack and Phil unconditionally because they have protected Elaine since birth. Young Boring said that after his sister's death, there was talk that her bodyguards had also been killed. Jack and Phil took the Boring children out into the alley and told them that this was the most fun place. Elaine asked what kind of miserable place this was. How could she have fun if there was nothing there? Jack said that it didn't seem like anything was ready here yet, but the right people would arrive soon and put on a show. Creed's younger sister shouted that no one would put on a show in such a terrible place. The young man looked around and realized that everything was exactly as he had initially assumed. The guy thought that at first glance it was a simple, unremarkable alley. However, Creed saw barricades erected that cut off the path of retreat. Young Boring realized that everything here had been prepared in advance, and Elaine shouted that they were leaving. Jack asked my lady to wait for the show, but the girl said that this was not an appropriate place for a show. The young man asked why his sister was so strong, and whether she really exercised physically. Phil blocked the path of Elaine, who was running away, and turned to her, singling out the young lady. He said rather angrily that the girl would be better off waiting for the people who had prepared the performance. Creed's younger sister asked why Phil was addressing her in such an unkind tone. Elaine asked fearfully what had happened to her bodyguards, why they were acting so strange today. Jack said they really didn't mean to scare their little mistress. He clapped his hands and said that they had a simple order, nothing personal, but she would have to put up with it. The girl realized that standing in front of her were no longer those kind bodyguards, but traitors without dignity. Nearby, we heard the footsteps of people who were confidently approaching. Creed thought that the ones who came up looked strange and more like some kind of bandits. Frank said it was a clean job, as he expected from the girl's personal bodyguards. Jack said that the conditions had been met on their part, and he wanted to complete this deal as soon as possible. The man said he was seeing a few more people than the contract stated. Frank said he was certain the Boring family's eldest son was not part of their deal. Jack said the guy was a bonus because the idiot tagged along with them, to his own detriment. Creed asked why the bodyguard was so confident that he could get away with such deals. Jack told the young man to worry about himself because he and Phil would run far, far away. The bodyguard is sure that the impoverished lands of the Borings are getting on their nerves. Jack is sure that all decent people have long since fled the lands of the Borings. Creed could no longer allow the lands that belong to the Borings, even if not rich ones, to be denigrated in this way. The young man cut the traitor in two in an instant. Jack didn't even realize what had happened. Everyone present did not expect such decisive actions from the young master of these lands. Creed said that at least his family doesn't manage to trade other people's lives. The young man asked Phil if he did not agree with the young heir to these impoverished lands. The remaining bodyguard said how could a knight of such a level let this weakling get close to him. Creed noticed that the traitor wanted to hide behind his younger sister, so he decided to solve the issue differently. The man in the afterlife said that it was simply unthinkable that this brat could do such a thing. Phil's body collapsed onto the dirty stones of the small area prepared for Elaine's capture. Frank's henchman said that this guy couldn't be the Boring's eldest son. The man said that the boy looked exactly like the Boring's stupid son. Frank thought that the young man couldn't deal with 2 knights. Mana was put into his attacks. Elaine asked her brother what was happening now, why they were behaving like this. Creed decided that his little sister should not see everything that would happen in this place today. The young man carefully laid his sister down and said that she needed to rest a little. Frank said he had to thank the boy for doing all their work. The man said they were planning to kill the two and noted that the guy was different from the rumors. Frank asked if Creed Boring was hiding his skills from others for moments like this. The boy asked why this vile man cared what the young man was doing. Creed thought that there were only 3 opponents against him. It didn't even look like a difficult fight. The young man realized that the people behind the man were weaklings, but he himself was emitting an abnormal amount of mana. The guy decided that he had to deal with Frank quickly, so that there wouldn't be any big problems. Creed asked who was the customer for his sister, and the man replied that a dead man had no need to know. The young man said that he knew that this bastard would not so easily give him the whole background of this matter. The Boring's eldest son said that he would now get Frank to talk and find out everything that interested him. The man told his henchman not to kill the boy, but to break all his limbs. Frank is convinced that in order for a young man to become a masterpiece, he must undergo a lesson in hellish pain. The men's pawns did not think for long, but immediately began to carry out the order given to them. Creed decided to use the tools he had prepared for battle. It was a good moment. The young man knew that in the heat of battle, wax candles could easily be confused with bombs and powerful firecrackers. The robber thought that someone had thrown a joke toy at him, but that wouldn't work with him. The Boring's eldest son realized that this moment of confusion was just what he needed. The guy realized that Frank's first henchman had deflated quite easily, which meant his judgments were correct. The second bandit asked what kind of tricks this young brat was showing. Was he really that lucky? Creed blocked the blow in his blind spot. Such tricks wouldn't work on the seasoned mercenary. The young man already had some unenviable experience in battles, and therefore knew how to most easily turn the situation to his advantage. The Boring's eldest son easily pinned his opponent's sword to launch a counterattack. The robber couldn't understand how this brat, who hadn't even trained, could move so confidently. Frank was left without his assistants, who were unable to carry out the last order. Creed suddenly realized that he was missing the most dangerous piece on this table. The man could not help but take advantage of such a miscalculation on the part of the young Mr. Boring. Frank shouted as the boy managed to block his attack, which was perfectly aimed. The abnormally strong villain thought as the guy blocked his attack from this position. Creed decided not to hesitate, and went on the counterattack to catch his opponent off guard. However, the young man's attempt was not the most successful. The robber managed to jump back and break the distance. Frank realized that there had been a miscalculation in his movements if such an inexperienced brat had managed to touch him. The Boring's eldest son cut the bandit's smoking pipe and stunned him with his movements. The guy noticed that his opponent was not losing his grip, and continued to attack from awkward positions. Creed successfully blocked this attack from his opponent, who said that he was impressed by what he saw here. Frank admitted that if he didn't have such mana, he would have lost his head. The young man was surprised, and wondered if his opponent had concentrated his mana to reduce the damage. Frank said he had no idea where the brat got such skills from, but he was very sorry about today. The man with abnormal mana is sure that the guy will die here and now from his sword. The thug is confident that the young man, with his meager mana reserves, will not be able to defeat him. Frank shouted that this intolerable bastard with an incredible gift for fencing would die here. Creed smiled as he fought against such a skilled opponent as this suspicious man. Frank asked himself why this kid was smiling when he was fighting him and blocking his attacks. The Boring's eldest son decided to use all available methods to teach the scoundrel a lesson. The experience of one of the 7 strongest people, the king of mercenaries, will not allow him to lose such a fight. Frank realized that he wasn't facing some brat. He was in for a real fight. The man confidently raised his hat and said that with such a small amount of mana, the blows would not work. The thug realized that the boy had a pretty strong ace up his sleeve. Frank fell to his knees. The pain from the blow from Creed Boring, an incompetent brat with no training, pierced him. The man thought that this brat had managed to break through his protective enchantment. The young man said he could not have imagined that there was a real conspiracy behind his sister's death. Creed confidently asked if this conspiracy was Frank's doing, or if there was a more influential person behind it. The young man shouted at the man to hold on with all his strength because it was going to hurt. The guy decided to use his special skill called Third Core Release. Frank shouted out what kind of nonsense was happening in front of him. Why did the boy have such an increase in mana? The thug didn't have time to figure out what had happened when the young man's blades were already heading towards him. The man admitted that the enemy's speed was incredibly high. He would even call it prohibitive. Frank was late in following the young man's movements, but still managed to respond to each of Creed's attacks. The guy was pushing back a strong opponent who initially had an abnormally high level of mana. The Boring's eldest son swung his swords again and again, but he could not reach the man. Frank blocked the attacks of his young opponent and did not understand where he got such great power from. The man realized that this fight wouldn't last long. His hands were going numb from blocking. The thug understood that no matter how much mana a person had, its effect was always limited. Frank admitted that he didn't know of any way to release mana in such bursts. The man realized that the young man in front of him had become a completely different, more powerful person. The thug's weapon gave way much faster than his absolute confidence in his victory. Creed delivered the finishing blow and cut Frank's chest. The victory was quite easy. The thug couldn't understand how something like this could happen. He was defeated by some little bastard. The young man understood that he should not kill such an important person as Frank now. However, the guy had to create a favorable environment for the upcoming negotiations. Creed knew perfectly well that this was one of the best options of all. When the Boring's eldest son realized that the man was completely ready for dialogue, he stopped. The young man asked if Frank, his friend, would like to continue the simple conversation. The guy clearly asked who ordered the thugs to do this to his little sister. The man thought that he couldn't just give in and tell the brat such information. Frank realized that he needed to at least take the girl with him to the grave. The thug calculated the trajectory of his hidden dagger and swung it to throw. Creed Boring was able to foresee this outcome, so he used mana threads and stopped the villain. The young man realized that the man could not simply give up, even under the pretext of death. The guy said he was ready to make a deal. The man had to answer questions, and he would take out the sword. Frank realized that the threads the boy used were made of mana, so he couldn't move. The man asked himself when the guy could have managed to prepare like this, and remembered the beginning of the fight. The young man said that he was confident that such a seasoned warrior would be able to lick his wounds. Creed said that if he destroyed his opponent's mana core, it would be all over for him. Frank couldn't believe his own ears. How could such a green brat know such things? The guy decided to show that he was completely serious, and to do this he directed his mana into the sword. The man roared in pain as he realized his mana was slowly beginning to dissipate. The thug clearly felt a serious crack appear on his mana core. Frank screamed that the guy had decided to die because the mana that had escaped would blow everything to hell. Creed said that such a fate awaited only amateurs, but he could definitely cope with something like that. The man realized that the young man was not bluffing, because he could clearly see the boy's frightening gaze. Frank asked himself if this was really how he would die, at the hands of some boy. The thug shouted that his employer was Count Duncan. It was he who ordered the boy's younger sister. The man shouted that his employer had ordered him to create a precedent between the Boring family and the Gradys. Creed said he believed the stranger's words, and thought that Duncan had been their enemy all along. The young man could not understand how the Duke of Delphine could conduct so skillfully from behind the scenes. The reincarnated mercenary king said that it was now clear to him why the thugs needed his little sister. Having learned the truth, Creed only thrust his sword harder to inflict even more pain on Frank. The man shouted out what this impudent fellow was doing, but he himself said that he would let him go immediately. The young man asked what had happened to the thug. Had he wet his pants? Frank burst out laughing, which only puzzled the guy who was carrying out his justice. The man shouted that he had already settled the matter with the Grady family, so his death would not change anything. The thug is sure that no one will believe such a brat, so the Borings will be drawn into the war. Creed stopped and said that the man did not understand the young man, so he would explain everything clearly. The guy said that he was reborn after death, so this time everything will be completely different. The man's body felt incredible pain. Creed decided to destroy his mana core and end the skirmish. The released mana energy of the thug rushed upwards towards the night sky. A fireworks display of unprecedented beauty and brightness illuminated the slums in the less wealthy lands of the Borings. Creed literally blew up Frank's body and thought about how exactly he had resolved the issue with the Grady family. The young man thought that this small area in the slums was now strewn with bloody bodies. The guy understood that there were both the bodies of unknown mercenaries and the bodies of Elaine's brave bodyguards. However, he considered the most important thing to be that his little sister remained safe and sound. She was out of it and had no idea how their skirmish with the thugs had ended. Creed threw down his sword. The fight was already over. He realized that he could breathe a sigh of relief. The event that had weighed heavily on him in his past life had finally come to an end. The young man felt incredibly terrible pain and was unable to quickly get his bearings. Over time, the Boring's eldest son realized that this was a side effect of his mana manipulation method. The youth said that the retribution from 3 cores was not a problem when he was the mercenary king. Creed realized that he couldn't give up so easily and remembered that there was one more place. He remembered that the elders had spoken of another place with bodies not far from the square in these slums. The guy understood what kind of bodies these could be, but to be sure he had to see them. Creed managed to find the right building, and realized that the thug had not lied and had already resolved the necessary issue. The young man knows what the Earl of the Grady family looked like, so he immediately recognized his son. The Boring's eldest son realized that the heir of the Grady family had been killed along with all his guards. Creed realized that his family had framed the Gradys as Elaine's killers and silenced them. The boy thought that as soon as the Grady family opened their mouths, a brutal war began. The Boring's eldest son got rid of all the evidence to prevent the Dolphins' plans from coming to fruition. Count Duncan's spy saw everything that happened perfectly well, but Creed didn't even suspect it. All the necessary information had already been received by the eyes and ears of the Dolphins. The mercenary had disappeared. One of the conspirators shouted out why the thugs couldn't take care of one little girl. One of the conspirators asked if it was really so difficult to make any effort to achieve the result. The mercenary said that Creed Boring was there, and the Count asked what this useless cretin had done to interfere. Duncan's subordinate shouted that everyone had known for a long time that this young man was a stupid piece of shit. One of the Dolphins shouted how this scum could even be used as an argument. The mercenary said that the guy turned out to be not such a piece of shit as the widespread rumors described him as. It seemed to the man that a completely different person was in the skin of this unbearable good-for-nothing. The mercenary asked to give him another chance, because the issue with the Grady family had already been resolved. All the members of the conspiracy shouted that the thug couldn't even get information about Creed Boring. Count Delphin asked everyone to be silent because the room had become too noisy. The man on the throne asked what kind of chance this worthless mercenary was talking about. The thug shouted that he would personally get rid of Creed Boring and his little sister. He is confident that he has a great trump card that will help him defeat this little ghoul. The council thought for a moment and asked who exactly they were talking about, if all the strong mercenaries had already fizzled out. The man replied that he was talking about Kane Lloyd, who was famous for his sword-fighting skills. The mercenary is confident that he is a true embodiment of strength, despite his relatively young age. The thug shouted that Kane was Creed's cousin, so there would be no problem with the clash. Everyone gathered wondered if this eldest son of the Borings was really that strong, and if the rumors were false. Count Delphin said that if this was another failure, it would be the last failure in the mercenary's life. The head of the entire conspiracy warned that the mercenary would not have another chance to justify himself. The next day, Ferdinand's voice was heard in the old training hall of the Boring mansion. The old man said that it was already lunchtime. The young master should postpone his training. The young man's subordinate saw an incredibly clear stream of mana rushing towards him. Creed was training to control mana from a distance, and for this purpose he decided to place the sword at the entrance. Ferdinand was incredibly surprised by such jokes, because he did not think that his master was so powerful. The young man successfully picked up the sword. By and large, such training was simply a warm-up for the heir. The guy said that he was generally pleased with the result, but admitted that he was still not perfect in control. Creed noticed his subject enter the training hall and said that he was glad to see the old man. Ferdinand apologized to the young gentleman. He didn't think the young man was so passionate about training. The old man asked how the guy managed to make the flow of mana something tangible. Creed said that these are mana threads. They allow you to use mana as something material and interact with the world. The young man thought that in his past life he had used this property of mana very often. However, Creed understands that under the current circumstances, he is running low on mana. The Boring son thinks he can use just one thread and then his mana will be enough. Ferdinand thought he was filled with mana from training, but he had never seen her like this. The old man thought that recently the guy didn't even use mana. How did he manage to come up with something like this? Creed asked why his loyal subject had come to him, whether something special had happened. Ferdinand said that he came here to convey the following words to the master. The old man said that he was incredibly grateful to the young master for saving his younger sister. The young man said that he could not act differently. There was no need to thank him for such actions. Creed said he was very hungry and suggested that the old man go out for lunch. The boy realizes that the festival was suspended to keep his little sister safe. Elaine said people don't believe her when she tells them her older brother saved her. The sister asked her brother to tell her what happened in person, but Creed said it didn't make sense. Valinda said she knew Jack and Phil were the perverts, but she couldn't prove it. Creed understands that Elaine is keeping quiet about a lot, although she herself cannot know the whole truth. The young man thought that he was satisfied that he had at least temporarily prevented the war. The guy admits that he alone will not be enough to stop the Dolphins. A maid entered the room and immediately apologized for the delay in dinner. Creed thought that in order to get an army, he had to get more power. The young man saw a very meager dinner, and all his thoughts instantly switched. The guy asked the maid if they had brought him dessert straight away, and where was the main course. Valinda asked if the young master was aware of the current situation in their not very prosperous lands. Creed heard the crowd's cries of discontent growing outside the window, asking for compensation for the damage. The people demanded that they be compensated for the losses they suffered as a result of the cancellation of the festival. People broke down the iron gates of the castle and demanded that their conditions be met. The man shouted that he was sure that even the guards behind the gates were rolling in money. Creed looked out the window and asked what the hell was going on. Why were those people screaming? Valinda understood perfectly well that something like this was bound to happen, so she decided to share her opinion. The girl said that their country is full of traders who live off the proceeds from such festivals. The boy's mentor said that last year, for example, they received colossal revenue. Creed said that he didn't expect this. Was the situation really that bad and completely hopeless? The Boring's eldest son realized that if his family didn't do something, things would only get worse. The young man asked the old man what the soldiers were doing now, and whether they couldn't pacify this crowd. Ferdinand smiled and said that the soldiers were not yet in their positions. The old man said that the soldiers were sent to clear the forests of monsters. Their raids had become too frequent. The boy understands that their lands are constantly at war with barbarians in the north and monsters in the west. Creed wondered how his family had come to this, since they had neither soldiers nor money. The young man said that he urgently needed to talk to Valinda face to face. The Boring's son told the girl to use all his money to calm the crowd. The young gentleman's mentor said that he had no cash reserves. The girl said that the count doesn't give him money because the guy spends it on all sorts of nonsense. The young man realized that he now had no money at all. He was in fact a real beggar. Creed asked if Valinda could lend him some, and she replied that she had absolutely no money either. The Boring's eldest son asked, since they had neither soldiers nor money, what they had left. The guy thought that without a penny in his pocket, even knowledge of the future would not help him. The young man thought that there must be at least something in the estate, at least some way to solve the problem. Rico ran into the room and called out to the young gentleman, who was deep in thought. Creed asked the knight why there was such a rush, what had happened that was so incredibly urgent. Rico shouted out that the young man was in big trouble, and that young Master Cain Lloyd wanted to see him. The young man quickly realized that his cousin had wanted to see him for a reason. This was just another adventure. Captain Scoven had already managed to take a good portion of blows, from which his face was distorted. Creed's cousin didn't stop there. He enjoyed causing pain to those around him. The strong man struck again and again, leaving not even the slightest chance for respite for the beaten knight. Young Master Cain's blows were incredibly heavy. They literally dented the armor. The captain could no longer hold back the uninvited guest. His strength to stand quickly ran out. Creed saw Scoven, with no living space left on him, fall to the floor. The loser could barely make out the figure of the young gentleman, but he already understood what was about to happen. The Boring's eldest son saw his subordinate suffering, and his expression instantly changed. Cain said that he had finally found Creed, who did not have to hide behind the servants' backs. The Lloyd's son greeted the little one who came out for the long-awaited meeting of the cousins. The strong man said that he was very glad to see the naughty rascal who was to blame for all the troubles. Creed said that he was also glad to see his cousin, but did not expect their meeting to be so soon. The young man remembers this face because it is simply impossible to forget it, no matter how much he would like to. The Boring's eldest son realizes that he is facing the heir of the Lloyds, allies of his family. Creed remembers that in his past life he was the only friend of a restless guy. However, the young man noted that, in fact, Cain was his most significant and intolerant enemy. The Boring's eldest son asked Rico what exactly had happened here. Such beatings were not accidental. The faithful knight said that they had received a report that someone had gone berserk in one of the local taverns. The guy said that at the scene they found Cain in the company of an escort knight. Creed's cousin began to question whether the widespread rumors about the young Boring heir were true. Rico said that the commander began to tell everything, in great detail, without missing a single crumb of events. The subordinate is sure that Cain suddenly went berserk and grabbed Skahan in a death grip. Creed's cousin asked how dare this insolent knight lie to the Lloyd heir's face. Rico said that this is exactly how it all came together to what he can see right now. Cain said that the report was incomplete, saying that his brother had defeated a bunch of orcs, and then managed to identify the traitors. Creed's cousin said he decided to use the liar to keep what was left of his common sense. Cain said that this would not have happened if his cousin had not spread such tales. The young man thought that this was exactly how his cousin had always been, and he would remember him for a long time. Creed thought that the Lloyd heir had always treated him like his own lackey. The boy remembers that every time his brother visited the Boring lands, he made a mess. The young man understands that no one even dared to look down on Cain because of his brute strength. Creed realizes that he, with his old inferiority complex, also submitted to his muscular brother. The guy is sure that his brother's arrogance is perceived as a positive trait in the Lloyd heir. The young man is sure that it was precisely because of this trait that he was subjected to even more terrible criticism from others. Kane thought that something had indeed changed slightly in the guy across from him. Creed's cousin thought that he usually started screaming even from such a small provocation. At the estate of Count Lloyd, shortly before the current events, the following took place. Kane asked if he understood correctly that he would simply kill his foolish cousin. The man said that if the boy succeeds, his family will be able to count on support from an influential person. Creed's cousin said it was not a difficult task, but his brother was also the heir to the Boring lands. The employer said that the thug only needed to provoke the guy into a duel and stage an accident. The man said that he would go with the strong man and specified that this was an excellent opportunity for Kane. The young man said he couldn't even imagine that they would order his own cousin. The Lloyd heir said that they could start right now. He couldn't wait. Kane thought that the employers wanted to get rid of the Boring heir because of the changes in him. The brute thought he knew a great way to do this, and asked what his brother was doing now. The Lloyd heir said the boy should have brought what was owed to him long ago. Kane said he heard about the festival being cancelled and offered to liven things up and pass the time. The jock is sure that he and his cousin always think about the same thing when they want to have fun. The Lloyd heir asked if he was wrong, then why they had so much fun together before. The Boring heir thought about it. He wanted to remember what they might have enjoyed doing together. Creed asked if his cousin was still thinking about the same thing. The young man remembered that his cousin always demanded women and plenty of strong drink. The boy thought he obeyed his brother because he didn't want to be beaten, but now everything is different. Creed remembered that Valinda had told him that the Count had forbidden him from receiving any monetary allowances. The young man realized that the source of his income had been so close all this time. The Boring heir wondered how he could make effective use of his cousin. Kane shouted, if his brother figured it out, then why was he still standing in front of him, rooted to the spot? The brute asked if his cousin couldn't see that he was already sitting and waiting for the results. Creed said that of course he completely understood his brother, and would immediately run for the presents. However, first, the bodybuilder needs to pay off the bills for all previous meetings. Kane's employer decided that this was the moment when it would be easy to escalate the tension to a duel. The Lloyd heir asked what kind of bills this young brat was asking him to settle. Creed said that his cousin had been living in luxury at his expense all this time, which meant he owed him 1,000 gold pieces. Kane said that not even 100 gold pieces were spent there, and in general, his brother treated him in a friendly manner. The Boring's heir said, what kind of friendship is there? He was just wiping his feet on a weak guy. Creed told his cousin to pay him the money that was currently missing. All the visitors in the room fell silent, because everyone understood how the dialogue between the heirs would end. Rico wondered what had come over his master, why he had suddenly decided to say such a thing to his brother Kane. The brute stood up and asked if his brother really thought he would be fine after such ignorance. The Lloyd heir asked if his brother seemed to have gained confidence from a couple of false rumors. Kane said that the youth before him was nothing more than a plague that had infected these poor lands of the Borings. Creed's cousin thinks he's considered a piece of shit in the north because he's talking nonsense. The Lloyd heir shouted that this was precisely why he deserved to be punched in the face. The thug missed his cousin, who barely moved. Rico and the employer were surprised that Creed did not even try to run away or beg for mercy. The boy's cousin shouted that the young man was a useless brat who didn't even know how to fight. Creed decided not to waste time on trifles, because he needed to put this mountain of muscles in its place. Kane didn't understand why this little eccentric's blow was so painful. The young man didn't stop at a blow to the liver, because it was unlikely to affect his cousin. The Lloyd heir managed to block the second blow from the guy who wanted to put him in his place. The guy realized that something was wrong with his cousin. He turned pale, although he was grinning at that moment. Creed's blow was quite successful and knocked Kane out for a while. The employer ran closer and asked what had happened to his master. Was he in pain? The Boring heir said his brother was putting on an act because he couldn't be hurt. The knight accompanying his cousin shouted out what this intolerable boy Boringov was doing. Visitors were surprised that Creed had managed to break through the muscle defense of the big guy Kane Lloyd. The young man quickly realized what his cousin was up to, so he decided to play along. However, the Boring's heir decided not to drag out this senseless performance and quickly resolve the differences. Kane asked in a whisper if he had played his role of victim in this easy game normally. The employer replied that the young man had shown everyone perfectly well that it was Creed who had started the mess. The Lloyd heir thought he had to secure the Dolphin's support. It was a rare opportunity. Kane realizes that this is simply a great opportunity to get rid of the impoverished Borings. He shouted that this insolent man dared to attack him while he was trying to restore the truth to his stories. The Lloyd heir tried to shout that he was challenging his brother to a duel, but he was successfully interrupted. While the muscle man was coming to his senses, Creed confidently said that he was challenging Kane Lloyd to a duel. The young gentleman said that he had been unfairly accused, right in front of his people and subjects. Creed said that his cousin had vilely attacked his man, and this had dishonored the honor of the aristocrat. Rico did not understand where the young gentleman got so much confidence and unprecedented dignity from. The Boring's eldest son said his cousin could not deny what he had just said. Kane said he always knew his cousin was a bit dense, but never to this extent. The Lloyd heir grinned and asked what it was like to dig his own grave in full view of everyone. Kane said that everything was just fine. He saw no reason not to accept this challenge to a duel. The young man said that his frail little brother should not regret such a decision, even if he dies. Creed didn't even bat an eyelid as his cousin drew his massive two-handed sword. The boy called out to his knight, who did not expect the young master to address him. The Boring's eldest son told his subordinate to bring all the protesters at the gate here. The young man asked to tell them that he was sure that he would get money for them very soon. Everyone understood that the festival had been cancelled, and the festive atmosphere had suddenly subsided. This incident left behind many dissatisfied people who were not freed from regret. Creed understands that people remained in a state of tension because they were unable to spend their time idly. The guy decided that in such a situation, a good show would help them let off steam and change their minds. The appointed judge declared the duel between young Master Creed and Kane open. Traders got the idea and decided not to miss such a rare opportunity to earn coins. People were lured in by fairly low prices, so demand skyrocketed. Some special individuals even opened betting shops on duelists. Money started flowing in, and everyone admitted that they had long dreamed of someone beating Creed. People kept betting on young Master Kane because the outcome was obvious. The heir to the Lloyd lands asked how his cousin dared to turn a sacred duel into a show. The strong man made it clear before the duel that his sword would not stop even when his brother begged for mercy. The young man thought that this was his main and real goal under the guise of today's visit. The guy easily saw through his cousin, who decided to easily gain a strong ally. Creed said that enough people had already gathered, so they could start right away. The knight accompanying the heir to the Lloyd lands shouted that it was not yet possible to begin. Kane's employer said that personally, he felt that the rates could not be fair. People wondered what this could mean, whether the betting company was really trying to cheat everyone. The bettor looked at the records and said that no one was betting on Mr. Creed to win. The young lord of the Boring lands heard that the people were convinced that the result was too obvious. All the people gathered are sure that the boy has no chance, and there is no fool who would bet on him. Mocking his brother, Kane said that even the market did not value him. He was so insignificant. The employer of the Lloyd family heir offered to change the bet to how long the short man would last. The knight approached, dumped a heavy bag of gold on the bettor's table, and sighed with relief. Having barely recovered, Scoven said that he was betting all his savings on the Boring heir. No one expected that there would be those very people who hopelessly believed in their young master. Elaine said she wanted to participate too and put that bag of gold on her brother. Rico thought that Mr. Creed's younger sister had managed to forgive him for his many stupid antics. The heir of the Boring family was surprised that his sister believed in him, even though they were currently not getting along well. The onlookers shouted out what Lady Elaine was even thinking about. She certainly knew what she was doing. Valinda reminded her mistress that the maid had warned her that this was an inadvisable bet. The bettor said that this was quite enough not to change the bet, but to fix the final odds. Kane was indignant that they were making him wait without a proper reason. Creed said that he was older than the strong man, so he would not perform first. It would be more correct. The young heir of the Boring family decided to draw his sword to declare his readiness for a duel. The guy swung his sword and declared that he was completely ready to meet the opponent. He could attack. Kane still didn't understand what was going on in the head of his talentless little brother, who had apparently gone crazy. The heir to the Lloyd lands asked the boy if he thought it was too late to build an elder. The judge made the gestures of readiness and shouted that the duel between the brothers was beginning right now. Kane decided not to drag out this battle, so he wanted to cut his brother down with just one blow. Creed tried to block the blow with his sword, but his cousin had much more brute force. The guy realized that his brother wanted to kill him, no doubt, which meant that everything was getting very serious. The heir to the Lloyd lands cried out that his brother had fallen too low to save face. The brute yanked at his brother's block, causing him to lose his balance and find himself at a disadvantage. Kane didn't even turn his sword around to attack his cousin as quickly as possible, and Creed skillfully dodged. The heir to the Lloyd lands realized that his cousin was too agile due to his height. The giant's powerful blows shattered the stone base of the ring into dust and small rubble. The observers are confident that even one hit from Mr. Kane will be enough to kill the young man. The strong man grinned because he was supported by all the people present outside the ring. Creed Boring thought his brother's face looked incredibly pleased, so he didn't want to ruin it. Valinda asked the young lady if they should stop this dangerous duel immediately. The employer of the Lloyd heir is certain that anyone who crossed blades with Cain was doomed. The man thinks that such a huge advantage in strength makes the opponent's counterattack impossible. The employer is confident that all he can do from this enormous strongman's attacks is to dodge and pray frantically. The man understands that dodging wastes energy, so Cain's opponent becomes exhausted and accepts defeat. The heir to the Lloyd lands always won according to exactly this scenario. He involuntarily got used to it. The strongman said that his cousin was as nimble as ever, but had nevertheless noticeably improved in his skills. Cain thought that Creed's behavior in battle quickly found an explanation in his life. The cousin of the young heir to the boring lands shouted that the boy had always been very good at running away. The strong man cut the young man with the broad guard of his sword and strained himself to push the boy away. Creed Boring didn't expect such a move from his cousin, who mercilessly pulled him up. Cain decided that throwing his brother into the air to an incredible height was the best idea possible. The onlookers held their breath in fear, waiting to see how the boring heir would manage to get out of this. Frightened, Rico could not contain his feelings and emotions and shouted out, "Young master!